welcome. It is our pleasure to have back with us on this program former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, somebody whose memoirs, Hard Choices, is fast becoming the most debated, discussed and analyzed book, not just here in the United States of America, but across the world. Of course, here in the United States, Hillary Clinton continues to be under intense media scrutiny, public attention, because of the big question. Will she run for president in 2016? Will she finally crack that big, high glass ceiling? It's a question that the book does not give a categorical answer to, but it tells us a lot more and is definitely worth a read for a ringside view of somebody who has, in a sense, found her role as Secretary of State becoming a transformative one, not just here for domestic politics, but across the globe. It is an immense pleasure to have you back with us, Madam Secretary, on this program. Good to see you here instead of at the other end of a crackling satellite line.
Well, thank you so much, and it's wonderful to be with you. I've enjoyed our previous times together and looking forward to talking with you now and I hope many times in the future.
Absolutely, and there's so much to talk about after reading this book, but I have to start with, I think, what's at the top of the world's attention. And it's something you talk about in your book, and that's, of course, what's happening in Iraq. Mm-hmm. Now, you have been, as it were, haunted by the question of whether you did the right thing when you first supported the Bush regime's decision to go into Iraq. And for the first time in this book, you actually do concede that it is a regret you live with. Yes. It was in good faith, yes, a decision in good faith, but it turned out to be horrifically wrong. Yes. Now you see what's happening here, there today. Mm. Does it give you an awful sense of deja vu? Does it reinforce that sense of regret about your backing that decision?
Well, it was a mistake, and I say that very plainly and clearly in the book. What's happening now in Iraq is the result of a number of issues. Certainly, I think it's fair to say that the way that the decision that President Bush made was implemented created some of the conditions that led to this current crisis, including disbanding the army and going out and purging people who were experienced in governing from being able to participate in the political life of a new Iraq. But also, unfortunately, what we have seen is that Prime Minister Maliki has been very sectarian. He himself has not created the framework for an inclusive government. And in today's world, people are not going to be left out. They have to feel that they have some channel for their concerns to be heard, to be respected. And unfortunately, the Maliki government has been extremely unwilling to share authority with the Sunni population. And then, of course, the spillover from Syria with the formation of extremist groups that are unbound by any humanity or decency, are trying to take over large segments of Iraq to form a new state. So there are many factors, but as you rightly point out, I certainly regret and believe the authority for President Bush to go into Iraq was wrong.
Given the question marks, as you yourself have detailed, over the role of the Prime Minister Maliki, do you believe it would be wise for the United States to intervene in any way? We've seen the latest statement from President Obama. He's going to be sending 300 military advisors in. He's not ruling out airstrikes, the use of drones at a later stage. He's only saying no to feet on the ground. But should the United States be getting involved at all?
Well, this is one of these classic hard choices
yes,
that I write about in my book.
Yes.
I have said categorically I would not support our troops going in, what we say, no boots on the ground. I have said that with respect to air power or even advisors, there has to be some agreement from Maliki to begin to change his political posture. And I assume that the Obama administration has been engaged in intensive discussions with Maliki. So the announcement that President Obama has made that 300 military advisors will go to Iraq is premised on a belief that Maliki will take the advice, will begin to include other voices, will try to reach out to the more establishment Sunni powers. And if that doesn't happen, then I don't think it is appropriate or useful for us to be involved. But I know enough about the way President Obama makes decisions that I'm sure he believes that there is a base on which to build the kind of political environment that would unite Iraqis against these extremists.
If you were in the administration today, what would you have advised President Obama to do in Iraq?
I would have advised him to do exactly as I believe he is now doing, to tell Maliki there will not be any American involvement whatsoever unless you take the following steps, and that we would begin through our channels to reach out to the Sunni tribal chiefs that we had worked with to turn back al-Qaeda in Iraq. And I don't have the kind of access to the top secret negotiations any longer, but that's what I believe is happening. Because when you think about how we were able to stop the spread of al-Qaeda in Iraq, it was by partnering Shiite with Sunni, with American support. I think that's the only way you're going to be able to get rid of this so-called ISIS group, too. So that's what I would be looking for, and I believe that's probably what the President has put under his list of things that have to be accomplished.
You know, but reading the book and also following your statements as Secretary of State, you were in favor of American troops staying on for longer than they did. Do you believe, given what we're seeing happening in Iraq, it turned out to be a mistake that troop pull out? And this becomes a very important question because of what's about to happen in Afghanistan, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But there's this perception building up, especially with people who are angry with America, who'll say that the United States starts wars, then it doesn't know how to end them, and then it pulls out its military before there's actual peace on the ground.
Well, with respect to Iraq, I did favor the continuity of American forces to work with the new Maliki government. They had enormous needs for intelligence, for training on everything from airplanes to more sophisticated ground equipment and the like. At the end of the day, Maliki wouldn't agree with that. And so the debate within our administration was settled by our offer to him as to what we thought would be in his interests, and yet we required an agreement in order to protect our soldiers, which is what we have all over the world, and Maliki basically said no. So that left us no choice.
Should you have pushed harder?
I don't know that we could have pushed harder because I think he was quite arrogant at the time, to be very blunt. I believe he had a view that he could handle whatever might come his way. And I think he probably wanted the Americans gone because we were always looking over his shoulder saying, don't do that. What about this? Be more inclusive. Talk to these Sunni leaders and the like. So I think he was perfectly happy to see us go. All he wanted from us then was to sell him sophisticated military equipment. And when we sell equipment, we send in teams to teach people how to use them, but they are often civilian, they're not necessarily military. So we left. And instead of following through on what he told me toward the end of my time at the State Department, that he fully intended to try to have a unified Iraq, we were no sooner gone than he began to renege on that. And he purged Sunni leaders from the military. He claimed there were criminal actions going on by Sunni political leaders. As a result, everyone lost confidence in him. The neighbors in the region, who are, other than Iran, predominantly Sunni Muslim, really began to sound alarms about Maliki. And I think that those alarms were unfortunately right to sound, because what we've seen is a leader who is only a sectarian leader for a small slice of the Iraqi population.
Would it be then fair to say that this is not a leader who's worth intervening on behalf of?
Well, I think you have to break that down. It's a very fair question. Everyone can change. He is now under tremendous pressure to change. Also, the Iraqis around him who are asking for help are often people that we have prior relationships with. And certainly the Iraqi people don't deserve to have this happen to them. The brutal assassination of now, I guess, thousands of people, the imposition of the most extreme form of Sharia law. The Iraqi people don't deserve that. So whether he himself merits our help or the help of anyone else, at this point he should be held accountable and should be pressured to change. But there are other stakes on the ground with respect to what happens to Iraq.
Is this a time or an opportunity for Iran and Washington to recast their relationship? And I ask this because there's this section in your book where you talk about how you came to India, and you had a tough task convincing the Indian government to make an announcement saying that we would diversify where we got our oil from. And basically, obviously, what you wanted was to cut down on the oil we were getting from Iran.
Right.
Now, is there an irony in the past friction between Iran and the United States of America, which, of course, hasn't gone away? But today, you're on the same side in Iraq.
Right.
Is this a historic opportunity, or should we not mix the two?
Well, I think we should always hope there is a historic opportunity. And we have to separate the nuclear issue, their pursuit of nuclear weapons against all of the international consensus against that, from what is going on in Iraq. And if they are willing to work for a more inclusive government in Iraq, if they are willing to let the Iraqi leaders themselves perhaps think of either changes, including changes in the prime minister, or different approaches toward dealing with extremism. But what we've seen in Syria doesn't give me a lot of confidence. I mean, Iran has basically propped up Assad, who has waged an absolute war of horror against the Syrian people. And he has done anything he could to stay in power with the full support of the Iranians, and including Iranian troops and Hezbollah from Lebanon, which are an Iranian proxy. So I do think we have to explore this, but I am not ready to embrace it or support it. I think much more needs to be done about what their real objectives are. And when we say we're in agreement, we're certainly in agreement that we don't want a terrorist group that, by all accounts, is worse than Al-Qaeda to be terrorizing part of Iraq and part of Syria. But are we of the same mind when it comes to the role that Sunnis should have in society, of the same mind when we try to support the Kurds, who have done the best job in Iraq in building a more successful area? So there are a lot of unanswered questions.
But, as I was saying, there is this narrative that could build around Iraq and Afghanistan in combination, where Washington would have to confront really messy situations, invasions it probably has to regret at some level. Now, you write extensively about what came to be known as AFPAC, with Richard Holbrooke arguing that you couldn't actually separate the regions. You had to see Afghanistan and Pakistan together. We're at a point when the Americans are going to pull out or have begun the process of withdrawing from Afghanistan as well. Your book gives a fascinating account of the back channel talks that were opened with the Taliban, but how they eventually didn't lead anywhere. This character called A-Rod and so on, who's in these back channel talks. Did it make you uncomfortable, especially as someone who was very vocal on what you felt about the Taliban's treatment of women, to negotiate with the Taliban?
It was a very uncomfortable experience. I sent the negotiators. I didn't do it myself, but I was responsible for picking the team and sending them off.
Did you have to think about it before?
I thought a lot about it, Barka. I thought very deeply about it. You don't make peace with your friends. I mean, that's the bottom line. You end conflicts by trying to find some political resolution. And very often there are legitimate grievances on both sides, but in my experience, you've got to try to sort that through and find some common ground if you expect to have a negotiated peace. With the Taliban, the Afghan Taliban, as apart from the Pakistani Taliban, which I think is an important distinction and important certainly to India, yes. There were openings that were made to us that were authorized by Mullah Omar, and it would have been irresponsible for us not to pursue them. So we did so. But I always believed that it should not be the United States making some kind of arrangement with the Taliban.
I was just going to ask you
No, we should not.
The U.S. position is we don't negotiate with terrorists. So what were these back-channel talks as detailed in your book with the Taliban?
It was to set up an opportunity for the Afghan government to negotiate with the Afghan Taliban. We were the facilitator. As I write in the book, President Karzai was eager to have a negotiation that he hoped would resolve the outstanding threats. And he tried it with a number of people. In fact, he created the High Peace Council. And, very tragically, the former President Rabbani, who was heading it, was murdered by someone who pretended to be an envoy. So the Afghans themselves were searching for ways. Now, for their own reasons, the Taliban did not want to negotiate with the Afghan government, which they said was illegitimate. Our position was, that's the only party for you to negotiate with because that's who you have to make peace with. They were perfectly happy to negotiate with us. We shared this information with the Afghan government, and we tried to see how serious they were about sitting down across from fellow Afghans. And it didn't get to where we wanted it to. We had hoped when I left that there could be an office opened in Doha, right? And that the Afghans would go to Doha, the Taliban would be in Doha, and they would begin these peace talks. I mean, we all know peace talks can take a very long time. They have to start somewhere. But the conditions that were imposed on the Taliban included they could not claim that they were government in exile.
Yeah, and that's exactly what they did
and
when
they went off and did it.
Yeah.
And so that immediately had to be shut down. So this has been a very long process to try to test out the.
But you don't regret having opened or made that attempt with
Not
the
at all. No, I think any country, and India's made a lot of openings and opportunities. You try to see whether you can resolve long-standing conflicts internally or across your borders. If you don't try, you never know whether it might be successful. That doesn't mean you in any way validate
what they stand for.
Yeah, what they stand for. I know when my husband was deeply involved in starting the peace process in Northern Ireland, the people sitting on the opposite sides of the table did not talk to each other for more than a year. They talked through the American envoy, and that was the only envoy they would accept because one side didn't trust the British, the other side didn't trust the Irish. So that's what the Clinton administration did. But you have to keep testing and probing to see how you can get people to a point where they get tired of fighting and dying, where they see that there's a better future. I'm hoping that the outcome of the election in Afghanistan will lead to a new president who signs a bilateral security agreement with the United States, who accepts an ongoing presence from the U.S. and from NATO, because I believe, even though President Obama has said we will change our position there, if you have one of the two remaining candidates working to try to both resolve the conflict, if possible, but continue to build up the Afghan security forces to protect Afghanistan, were to come to the United States in 2016 or so and say we need continuing help, there would be an openness to that. But you can't have a blank check. The Afghan government, just like the Iraqi government, there needs to be a point where you say, here are the conditions under which we can stay. Are you ready to meet those? They say yes or no.
What emerges in your book very clearly is President Karzai also seeing Pakistan as the key problem. Now, there's a separate chapter in the book on Pakistan, and I know a number of people in my part of the world would be very interested in hearing you speak a little bit about that. You speak about going to Pakistan and having to deal with some very hostile questions, and then you say in a moment of absolute candor and bluntness that A, elements of the ISI, the intelligence services, are linked to the Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, and B, you speak about how someone in the Pakistani security establishment has to be in on the knowledge of safe havens for these terrorists.
Yes.
Do you believe that the United States failed, in a sense, to get Pakistan to clean up its act?
I do hope a lot of thoughtful people in India will read my book and particularly read these chapters about the region that we're talking about because it is a view that I adopted. here's where I end up. I think that the civilian government, the Zardari government, which was the first civilian government to be elected that ever got to complete its term, which was for Pakistan an accomplishment in their democratic evolution, did not know what the connections were between elements within the military and the ISI and various extremist and even terrorist groups. I think that the elements within the ISI and the military, both past and present at the time I was dealing with it, were under the mistaken view that having these kinds of proxies vis-a-vis India, vis-a-vis Afghanistan, were in Pakistan's interests. Not just the military's interests, but in their sovereign interests. As I say in the book, it's like keeping poisonous snakes in your backyard, expecting they will only bite your neighbor. And what we're seeing now is the continuing threat to the state of Pakistan by these very same elements. And my argument to my Pakistani counterparts from the very beginning of my term was that they had to take seriously this threat, and they had to do everything they could to end the relationships that existed between the military and the intelligence services with these groups, and they had to try to end their dangerous behavior both inside of Pakistan, across the border in Afghanistan, and obviously, from my perspective, vis-a-vis India. I also write how when I was in India after the attack in Mumbai, I was very struck how the then government said it was very difficult to exercise restraint.
That if this happened again, that's what you say in the beginning, that if this happened again, all bets are off.
That is, and I don't think any government could say anything different.
How did you respond when Sonia Gandhi and Manmohan Singh conveyed this to you?
That I understood it. I thanked them for the restraint that they did show because, as I said, I believe this is an element within the military intelligence institutional base, but that the civilian government was not involved. And I thought it was important to show restraint because Zardari's wife had been killed. Benazir Bhutto had been killed by parts of this conspiracy or this coalition. But I think no country can turn away from that kind of attack continuously. So I did understand, and that's why I put it in the book, because I totally see why. But with Pakistan, you know, for me, Pakistan is a conundrum, because among the people I dealt with, the educated members of the civilian government, even those at the top of the military and the intelligence establishment, they express so many of the same views that I hear in India, for example. I mean, you both stare at each other across that border and are rightfully, because of your histories, concerned. But you go a little bit deeper and you find all kinds of groups that are thriving, either because of support from the military intelligence side or indifference. And by that I mean that a lot of the attacks until fairly recently were in parts of the country that were not of direct concern
to Pakistan itself.
To Pakistan itself. To neither the political, military, or business elite. That happened somewhere up by the Afghan border. And then all of a sudden, you start to see those groups moving closer into the Swat Valley. We've just seen the attacks in Karachi. And I don't see how Pakistan can ignore this much longer. Their idea that they have these groups to provide strategic depth, as they like to say, vis-a-vis Afghanistan or vis-a-vis India, I think if that were ever true, which I doubt, but if that were ever true, it no longer is. And whether Pakistan can make a decision that includes all the various power sources inside the state to once and for all go after extremists, shut down their training camps, their safe havens, their, madrasas that are inculcating suicide bombing behavior, and begin to have a different view of themselves in the future. That's the question they face.
When we met last, when you were in India, you spoke about how you had actually announced this $10 million bounty for information leading to the arrest of one of the architects of 2611, Hafiz Saeed of the Lashkar-e-Taiba. He's still out there. He's still out there. He holds rallies. Nobody can touch him. Why do you think that someone as powerful as yourself was not able to do more about a group like the Lashkar-e-Taiba?
Because I think the very strong conviction in the military and the intelligence and other elements within the society is that they're not a threat to us, namely Pakistan. They're a threat to India. And by doing what they're doing to turn away from LET and others, they continue to cause India to have to take them seriously or have to worry about Pakistan. Those days should be over. I mean, that's ancient history. You know, part of what I see as I go around the world are people who are imprisoned by the past and people who are moving toward the future, facing the problems that they have, whether it's poverty or disease or conflict, whatever it is. And Pakistan has not made its decision to do that yet.
Who's accountable for that? You said elements in the military intelligence establishment. Is it the Pakistan Army at the very top? Is it something that's happening at the middle rung? Where does the buck stop?
Well, we certainly never had any evidence that it went to the very top, but that may or may not be true. But we did have evidence, which we did present on several occasions, that there were both retired and present active duty military and intelligence officers whose job it was, or at least as they defined their job, to tend to keep an eye on, certainly, but to, in effect, protect the extremist groups. The Haqqani Network, one of the most vicious extremist groups around. They operate openly. Now, Mullah Omar is in Pakistan. You go down a long list of terrorists who threaten Afghanistan and threaten India, and by extension threaten the United States and our forces and the forces of our allies in Afghanistan. But I believe that oftentimes it's the attitude taken at the very top is, don't tell me, give me deniability. If President Zardari calls me in and says, who do you think killed my wife? I have to be able to say, sir, I don't know. I have no idea. Or if you get called in by another civilian official who is saying the Americans say that there's a training camp and they are going to, take action if we don't take action. Well, we'll look into that. I mean, it's
creating plausible deniability.
It's creating plausible deniability. That is my view. And I personally deeply regret. I'm distressed by what I see happening inside Pakistan, because there's no doubt they've lost tens of thousands of civilians and soldiers in attacks. I mean, the last count when I left office was more than 30,000. And I'm sure it will continue to climb.
So in a sense, it's existential almost for Pakistan. I have to ask you, though, because so many people in India are going to pick up this book and read it. We have a new government.
Yes.
And this is an interesting crossroad for India and the United States of America. And India knows you, admires you, likes you, Secretary Clinton. And therefore, the question is this. Is this a long shadow hanging over this relationship because our current Prime Minister is somebody who was denied a visa by the United States of America?
In the prior administration.
By the Bush
administration. Here's how I see it, Barka. I am very hopeful that the new government, with its very large majority, will be able to take actions that will improve the economy, strengthen the foundations of economic growth and prosperity broadly based for the Indian people. That they will be able to address corruption so that the average person doesn't feel that others are profiting and they are not. So from what I know about the new Prime Minister, from what I have seen since he was elected and what he has said, he seems to be very committed to that kind of path. He also impressed me when he invited Nawaz Sharif to his swearing-in ceremony, as well as other regional leaders. If he leads an inclusive government, and there isn't any country in the world that is more diverse than India, But if people, regardless of their religion, their caste, their geography, feel that this is a prime minister for all India, and if he explores potential opportunities in the region, both, I would argue, looking west and looking east, I think it could be a quite consequential period for India. And I, as a person who considers myself a strong friend of India, I would love to see that.
Was it a mistake, you think, for the United States to have denied him the visa? Because the argument was that it happened at a time when George Bush himself was so contentious. And then you singled out this one politician and denied him a visa, something that it's not as if the Obama administration reversed or made efforts to reverse.
Well, I think that's in the past. I know that President Obama called Prime Minister Modi. I hope that they will have an opportunity in the near future to actually meet and sit down and end any lingering questions about that past incident. But of course, what we all hope for is that the Prime Minister, by his actions, demonstrates unequivocally that he is the Prime Minister for all of India, every single group inside India. I think that's his intention, and then that ends whatever lingering concern anyone had.
And is there still lingering concern? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I think not now, but at least not in our government, not now. And I don't think there should be, based on what kind of a campaign he ran and what he has promised to do.
Okay, in the end, I have to ask you, the book is called Hard Choices.
Yes.
What has been your hardest choice, or is that choice still a work in progress, which is whether or not to run in 2016?
Well, that is certainly the next hard choice that I face. And as I write in the book, I think the questions that anyone who runs for a high office, whether in our country it's president or in the case of India, prime minister, is really not will you run and can you win? I mean, those are political questions. We all know that everybody talks about them. But the real questions are, what is your vision for the country, and can you lead us there? I think what your new prime minister did was to paint a vision for India of trying to cut through red tape, cut against corruption, create more jobs, and give people all over the country a feeling of hope that they and their children will have a better future. Well, we're at a stage in our country where we have a lot of political disagreeability, a lot of gridlock that is unfortunately paralyzing our system. And I think we have to get back to asking ourselves, what is the vision for the United States in the 21st century?
But that doesn't tell me why you would not run. I mean, why would you not run?
Well, you know, I will do the weighing process. It's a hard choice.
It won't be an instinctive call in the end?
In the end, it will be. But I will also go through what I would like to see happen in our country, how I think it could be done. But I also am very committed to the work I do at the Clinton Foundation with my husband and my daughter. I am very committed to becoming a grandmother and seeing what that experience is like. And frankly, not being on the political high wire right now so that I get to spend more time with my friends and my family. That sounds very, very simple, but it's those simple joys that I have been missing for too long.
Well, I have to say, as a woman, I do hope you run, because somebody has to crack the glass ceiling, the highest glass ceiling, that you brought so many cracks into the last time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Pleasure talking to you.
Great to see you again.
Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.